Like a bunch of nothing.
In your own like demiurgic prison.
Yeah. So I don't know. I've always had like a vague interest / belief in astrology ever since. Like there was like it feels like I don't know. We've been reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead at the moment, and it's sort of like all about transitional phases and like you're in a bardo essentially. I remember that like that summer before I went to uni, I had an insanely drugged up session with a good friend of around the area that was also in a local band and stuff. But he was also like it was a bit older than me, also played bass, but like had a much longer hair, much bigger beard, and was just a total wizard. And we did like all these drugs, and then he fucking told me all this astrology stuff with like my birth chart and everything, and it blew my fucking mind how like crazily accurate it was, because we weren't that close, but it was just like, dude, this is eerie.
Yeah.
Eerie.
Yeah.
And then I've been getting into it more recently because of this. There's all these apps, like we've got an app called Sky Guide, so you can see what's in the sky at night, which is super fucking useful in London, where you have all these other anomalous lights that appear and stuff.
For me,
a good natal reading will get everyone in. It's like seeing a ghost or something. It's like, wow, something
definitely
is going on in reality that I hadn't previously considered before, because you just looked at some little dots on a circle and said my whole life. Like, that's usually people's intro into astrology, is thinking like, I never thought of it before, and now I can't dismiss it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
For me, it was like its cultural analysis has always been the thing that like has led me, but that I keep running into occult themes because of my cultural analysis. So I inevitably have to excavate them, and it always deepens whatever I'm doing culturally. So that's
I like astrology. I have this thing. It's kind of like how I could convince Richard Dawkins to go to church. And it's because the people who go to church or temple or whatever have better health outcomes and live longer across the board. So there's like a materialist reason for going to church, and presumably it has something to do with vagal tone exercises from singing and being in community, all that kind of stuff, right? Similarly, astrology could be 100% inaccurate as a forecasting model, but still be powerfully worth your time, because it's not a predictive model, it's a language that contains a predictive model. So I like it, even if there was zero correlation between how we experience planets and stars and future events, it's still powerfully medicinal as a language of meaning. So yeah, I like it.
Big time. And also, we like to sneak attack our guests, and we have started recording, just so you know. Welcome, Gordon White. And that was an amazing intro. This is an interview that we've wanted to do for so long. You had me on your show, and it was about time that the favor was returned. Welcome to Mystic and the Machine. What a wonderful person to have as one of our first guests on this show as well. For the people in our audience who may not know who you are, would you like to introduce yourself? Just give a brief sort of rundown of what you are, what you do.
Sure. So I'm Gordon, born and raised in Australia, dual British citizen, lived around the world, lived in New Zealand, lived in London and Bristol and so on, worked in media, worked for Discovery Channel, BBC and so on. And I am a magician and shamanic healer. So about 10, 12 years ago, 14 years ago, that we do 2024. I started blogging about magic and sharing my experiences, and that turned into the first couple of books and a podcast. And now I'm the host of Rune Soup, and it's a members area. It's the world's largest online magical training community, and it's a magical podcast. And I live on a permaculture farm in southern Tasmania.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, I started off as a Rune Soup baby. I've been listening to Rune Soup for years, just years. Since we graduated uni, probably. So this is incredibly exciting. I've learned so much from your show, learned so much from the wonderful guests that you've had on your show as well. It was definitely my gateway drug into a lot of different occult concepts.
100% what it's for. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it does what it says on the tin. So anyone who's not checked out Rune Soup yet, what are you fucking waiting for? Go do it. Go do it. So to start off, I guess the cosmogenesis of our kind of intersection. Last year, you introduced me to your audience on your podcast. It was a really wonderful episode. Your audience was also really kind and sweet. The comments were overwhelmingly just positive, and just kind, and I felt very understood. So I hope to provide you that in return today. You sent me a bunch of your books. You sent me Starships. You sent me Animistic. You also sent me your new divination book as well, which
Yeah.
I'm
like
yet
Jung.
to it.
I'm like,
I'm still working through. I'm still working through that one. Sorry, but yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Well, you like Jung, and I'm like, I'll send the cards to Angie, because Lenormand isn't tarot, but it hits some of the same, I don't know, Jung nerve centers,
Yes.
right? So I figured, yeah.
And major synchronicity too. I was just like, okay, I'm gonna open this now and like pull a card just to see what comes out. And the book card came up, and
Nice.
the theme of the red book, obviously written in the little sort of passage that came along with it, also came up. So I was like, holy shit, what is Gordon done? Like, holy. And then it came in the amazing scarlet imprint packaging. And I was like, is someone sending a bomb to my house? Because I forgot that I forgot. And it was addressed to Angie Speaks as well. I was like, who the fuck is sending a package to Angie Speaks? But thank you so much. It was such a pleasant surprise, like really, really kind of you. So for the first question I have for you is to do with artificial intelligence and UFOs. We're obviously entering a very strange time in human history. A lot of very odd things are happening, and it's sort of forcing our incredibly secular paradigm to contend with some very, very big ideas like cosmogenesis, like apocalypse, things that the secular paradigm has kind of repressed for a very long time. People like us who are interested in the occult are often viewed as weirdos, as fringe, but the more artificial intelligence enters the conversation and begins to sort of drum up these really major philosophical questions. The same thing with the way that UFOs are kind of entering the mainstream question and are raising these incredibly philosophical questions. People like us are now, people are looking to us in a way that they never have before. And some of the ideas that we're interested in are being taken a lot more seriously. So my first question for you is, how do you think this is going to develop in the coming decade? And have you noticed the same sort of trend?
So when we look at ufology, there are two broad schools of thought that have kind of like two different origin stories, I suppose. Now, there's the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is the little green men in ships showing up and probing our butts and destroying our cattle. And the origin story for that is very typically, once we activated the first nuclear bomb, we attracted their attention. Now, you can get ETH people who don't say that, but that's like a main one. Then there's non-ETH, which is like, that's probably not Marvin the Martian, it's probably something else. And it's probably interdimensional, you can say fairies, blah, 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 right? And that origin story is more typically, they've been with us the whole time. So that's like the Jacques Vallée idea of, or my friend Chris Knowles calls them elusive companions. But if you look at the Watchers in the Bible and pre-biblical texts, there's a whole bunch of motifs that look familiar just without the mid-20th century science fiction overlay that typically comes with these things. So I look at, we were talking about Pluto and Aquarius earlier, and one of the signifiers that other astrologers are so excited about with this pretty hectic trend or transit, to be honest, is the announcement of UFOs or what have you. Like, oh, this would be the UFO era. Sure, except what if they've been here the whole time? And so what we look for is a fundamental step change in how we experience reality, so that these things look a little bit closer to what maybe they are. And I think we're seeing that because actually I was at the wedding of, I think, the world's best ufologist, Richard Dolan, some years ago in the middle of the Australian desert. Wow. And we were having a good long chat under the stars. And he was saying that for him, like he was a Cold War historian who found some top secret documents about like UFOs and so on from during the Cold War. And that began his journey in the mid-90s to what he is today, which I think is the best UFO historian. And he said the thing about UFOs is that it's like an initiation or a chapel perilous moment. You go in as a Cold War historian thinking you're on a paper trail for memos between Canadian generals or whatever. And you come, and he's married, his wife is wonderful, Tracy, and you come out the other end getting married at Uluru by Catherine Austin Fitz to a remote viewer. Like you're just like in this very different world at that point. I kind of think that's the point of UFOs. You begin the process. You can be an experiencer, a little light in the sky, or just the self-evidence of us not being alone. And a couple of years later on that journey, you're mainlining Bufo in northern Mexico, like to clear some impact. Like it's what the journey I think is for. And something Whitley Strieber said that stuck with me is if he'd watched better science fiction as a child, then his experiences that became communion in the 1980s probably would have been more pleasant. Because like he describes them, and rightly so, as a sexual assault. Like where we get this kind of joke about probing from is basically Whitley's experiences. So he was sexually assaulted by interdimensional beings, and he's aware that had his imaginal, if his imaginal had different paints with which to paint, that encounter might have looked like something else.
Yes.
And so for me, I think that's the step change we're seeing. The official reality that we are living through at the moment is melting like cake in the rain. And that's the other side of the process of realizing UFOs as something more than little green men.
Yes. It's so interesting that you bring all of this up, because I just made a video on Jung's flying saucers essay. And he's sort of not concerned with the reality and the unreality of UFOs in that sense. He's more looking at the psychic content of this phenomenon and also what it's doing to the culture. And there's this really interesting religious studies professor, Dr. Diana Pasulka, who I'm really into. She wrote this book called American Cosmic, and she's sort of been studying the phenomenon for a long time and the visionary rumors surrounding the UFO phenomenon. And one of the really interesting things she says is that it's sort of a forcing mechanism, especially in a hyper mechanized secular culture where enchantment is lost and we have this like very sort of materialist perspective, and we think we've like discovered everything there is to know about the universe. This phenomenon forces everybody to reckon with these really deep philosophical questions. People who aren't, and the people, ironically, one of the things Jung said in his essay is that the people who have these encounters are often the least psychically or spiritually prepared to confront the image. A lot of the time, people like government officials or random farmers, people who are not necessarily known for their giant imaginations in that sense. And like you said,
I like that. Like I know Diana, we did a show together, a sold out show at the Guggenheim, the first and only show about UFOs.
Sick.
And
she's awesome. I'm like,
she's amazing.
I love her. She's so good, so good.
And the group around Diana, I know I like the forcing mechanism thing. I'm just not, because they come from, and especially in her case, like a religious background. I am not as convinced that the motive is not so much benign, but our development or redevelopment. It might be. I just think we're dealing with phenomena, and I'm glad you mentioned Jung, because as far as I can tell, so Whitehead said this thing about Plato, which is like basically all of philosophy is footnotes to Plato. And I think all of ufology is footnotes to that essay. I think I think literally if you read that essay and then everyone else's commentary, because I think he just got it right, as he usually does, particularly towards the end of his life. And one of the better footnotes is obviously Jacques Vallée, and he cautions against, so he uses that idea of a cultural thermostat, which is a more morally neutral way of saying what Diana's saying, which is these phenomena are impacting our psyche and culture for their own reasons, which we interpret as good. But,
Well, I think you
how would we
mentioned
know?
you mentioned Whitley Strieber before, and
Yeah.
he was on a podcast I watch with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, and
Mhm.
he basically talked about an experience that he had with his wife, like in a hot tub in the back of their house, where a UFO essentially appeared like logs on the back of a big lorry with Christmas ornaments wrapped around it. And he talks like a lot about like them being quite mischievous
Yes.
and the ability to manipulate our psyche, and so that they can either appear or not appear, or appear as whatever.
But
And
Jung links this behavior alchemically to Mercury.
Yes.
Because Mercury, think about the behavior of the element Mercury. It's a trickster. It also moves around erratically and all of those different things. And the reason why I brought up the forcing function element is because obviously once you get deeper into the Jung's flying saucer essay, he links it to the servator mundi, or the concept of the servator mundi. And that's like deeply numinous.
Yes.
So my whole thing is, this thing isn't it I don't think I think it goes beyond benevolent or malevolent. I think that when you're dealing with something truly numinous, it's kind of like that. And I think that that's like the sort of mentality that it should be like approached with. It's like the Ark of the Covenant scene in Indiana Jones. It's like it's hard to explain what I'm trying to explain, but in that sense, I don't think it's something that's necessarily going to have the sort of benevolent effect on a consciousness that's not prepared to deal with it, or that hasn't earned the right to deal with it in that sense because of its
Great.
numinous quality.
So
you
what
used
we don't
right.
have as shamans, right? Like Whitley kind of is, because the part of Whitley's story that people only understand when they move in is that he has been Gurdjieff trained, and he's been doing Gurdjieff meditations like his whole life. So he was meditating for 20 years before the event happened to him in upstate New York. So that's a factor in his experiences, because when we come back to what Jung said and what you brought up earlier, which is very often, however, that's not the case, and it's like some drink driving truck drivers in Omaha,
Mhm,
right? And that's interesting on the level of, if these phenomena are expressions of the psyche, then they experience time differently and they don't have human morality. And what I like about late stage Jung is he hides things that I think we can pick up that weren't in there when he says it doesn't matter if these are physical or not. Well, by that stage of his career, like everything in the cosmos is produced by the psyche. So the definition is irrelevant. And people don't actually get that what he's saying is these are physical things coming from essentially the cosmic imagination, because everything is a physical thing coming from the cosmic imagination. And he slips these things in there where you're like, you're full wizard at this point, Carl, aren't you? And that's why I think that's the ultimate essay, because what ufology should do, however you come into it, is spit you out into philosophical positions like this, invitations into directions like this. Like that's at least what it's for. And it's definitely doing that to culture. And coming back to, I guess, the Raiders of the Lost Ark type idea, is there is inarguably a corrective. So I think, generally speaking, I think long-lived cultures, so Aboriginal Australia and so on, which are the longest living cultures on Earth, probably have stuff to say that we've discarded, because they've managed to do things like see off entire ice ages, and they're still there. And if you look at the primacy of, let's call it right relation, in Indigenous cultures, when you step outside of it, things get destroyed, but it's not a moral action. So in the Andes, you have the idea that anything that's out of right relation with Pachamama will be recomposted because it's out of right relation. It's like weeding. And that includes whole civilizations, right? Like that's just, if you're out of right relation in the cosmos, it's nothing personal, we're just composting, right? And the interface between these phenomena and structures of government and business that I think are powerfully out of right relation it's going to get interesting, especially as we head into World War III, where the story is plainly being used as air cover, literal air cover for war weapons that we're not supposed to know exist, and it's that doesn't end well for Western civilization. But hey, it's not personal; it's just compost.
Well, I guess whilst we're on the subject then of the three-legged race of those things of World War III, AI, and UFO disclosure, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact on 2024?
Definitely not UFO disclosure, because you can tell a government agent is lying when his or her lips are moving. So the idea that you're going to sit around waiting for what? Biden to say UFOs are real, please. King Charles, Biden, I'm good. All right, I've reached my own position on these things. Then I think, like, realistically, the imminence of World War III, which is actually next year, and the timing model will be self-evident by the end of this year. So I think it'll be that. I think it'll be the intro credits to World War III is the thing that's going to have the biggest impact this year.
Fuck. Fuck.
Good year to get some traveling.
Like, good year to get some traveling in. Oh shit. Oh fuck. Yeah. it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, really. But even with the reason I brought up the servator mundi forcing function is that in terms of, Jung's concept of the UFO disc representing the psychic totality, that now is a great time for that to come around. And obviously the psychic totality forces us to reconcile the conscious and our consciousness and everything that's been pushed into the unconscious. And in the post-secular age, and in the secular age, that's a lot of things. A lot of things have sort of been pushed beneath the surface. And now we're entering this like strange post-secular age where what's unconscious is sort of re-emerging. And I think that UFOs are like a big part of that, and that they are kind of here as a forcing function at this very perilous time where we're seeing rapid and, unethical, in my opinion, technological acceleration, looming World War III, and now the psyche is doing a lot of weird shit. And I think
one of the things people need to understand is that the UFOs are here now, even if little flying saucers haven't landed on the White House lawn, because they're in culture, because we are talking about them, because we are thinking about them. From a Jungian perspective, they are already performing that function.
Exactly.
Right? So they've arrived. Congratulations. Like they're here. You're here for the disclosure moment already, because this is what the beginnings of Pluto and Aquarius look like.
Exactly. And one of the really fascinating things about Jung's flying saucer essay is that it's hopeful in the sense that the servator mundi does the forcing function thing and, forces the reconciliation of opposites and all of that good stuff. But it's also terrifying in the sense that, if the culture is unprepared for it, it could lead to mass psychosis, all sorts of things. One of Jung's primary concerns was the fact that we don't have the spiritual or symbolic framework anymore to contextualize these psycho-spiritual events. He also makes ties to, 2000 years ago, the turning of the previous aeon when, the Christ archetype came, and how that was the forcing function of that period, and how that had an effect on that aeon. And he talks about how during that aeon, divine intervention wasn't something that was out of the pale. It wasn't something that was, seen as strange. It was very much part of the psyche of the people who lived at that time. But now we all know unconsciously the world is in peril. We know we're imperiled by our technologies. We know our environment is in peril. We know that, our leaders are psychotic and insane. And I think that the collective psyche is drumming up this forcing function, or the servator mundi, as Jung puts it, in order to kind of possibly present hope to us, hope for this sort of quote unquote bardo state that we're in to actually have a positive outcome, and that our next life cycle will be good.
Do you not see one
and
of
better and that's kind of what I'm hoping for, is that we'll
say, don't you see one of the potential kind of outcomes of UFO disclosure. Yeah, sure, maybe it might not be Biden or King Charles or something, but it could be kind of, some other kind of information that comes out that's just infutable or whatever. That wouldn't have almost like a unifying, nullifying against a World War III kind of thing. Like, who's going to be in favor of a World War when we've just uncovered like essentially one of the biggest mysteries of humankind?
Psychopaths, like nothing stops it. It's in the model. Like there's money and
money
there's money and control.
And you said before that something you think it like next year is the year. Is this like a written in the stars astrology type thing?
Yeah, literally, yeah. 2025 to 2027 is going to be the worst years of your life.
Fuck's sake, no. Yeah. God forbid. No.
The thing about astrology is like, this too shall pass. Like the medicine of a cycle model is like, this is really bad because bad things happen and good things happen, and that's just what it is. But then good things happen, right? So a Pluto transit front loads the expulsion of toxins and corruption. When Pluto moved into Capricorn, we got the 2008 financial crisis. So it's exposure of corruption and venality in officialdom. So that's banks and government and so on. Aquarius is like crowds and technology and media, also medicine, and space and so on. So it's like tyranny of crowds, but also media and so on. And this is the digital ID and other kind of like weird pushes, but it purges toxins at the beginning so that by the time it leaves a particular sign, the sign is reconfigured because it's basically been through the accusatory process of the king of the underworld. So it's going to suck. Next decade is great. So if we can stick around until then, that's what's in the model. And the other thing to bear in mind is that the cosmos is co-creative. So we are doing this, but this is a Jungian thing again. When he was asked, like, do you think we're going to have nuclear war? And he said, it depends how many people can integrate their shadow. So we're having nuclear war because not many of us have managed to do that, but we can, right? So the apocalypse can come in at an 11 out of 10, or it can come in at like a 3 or 4 out of 10. And that's entirely in like our hands, people who can do the only thing that's left to do, the only thing that's ever helped or changed anything, which is that inner transformational work.
Definitely. And then the other thing I found really hopeful about Jung's flying saucer essay is sort of the entire crux of what he's hinting at is that the collective psyche also has self-healing mechanisms. I remember I was listening to this Jungian analyst talking about how when she is, dealing with patients and they're going through the worst time of their life, massive catastrophe, divorce, illness, all sorts of, shit that life throws at you. And how that even when they're lost for words and they don't know what to say to that person, they're aware that that person has a self, capital S self. They have a thing beyond their ego that will lead them full circle. Jung's talks when he was sort of, because we're reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead at the moment, so we're obviously confronting a lot of themes to do with death and rebirth and cycles. And obviously when Jung was working with people who were dying, he talked about how he noticed how they would just sort of live on every day as if they weren't, and how that's sort of how you cope with things. You just sort of live on, and how when he was dealing with older patients who suffered with grief and had sort of become paralyzed by fear of death, that was the advice that he would give them. He would tell them to just sort of continue to go on. So I find it quite hopeful, this notion that the psyche, the personal psyche has self-regulatory, self-healing mechanisms, but the collective psyche also has self-healing and self-regulatory mechanisms. And I really think that this UFO phenomenon, regardless of what it actually is going on in tangible brick and mortar matter reality, I think it does have medicine within it for the collective psyche in a very big way. I think this could be a very self-healing, self-regulatory, humbling confrontation with the depths that is sorely and desperately needed by humanity right now in order to make us integrate our shadow, make us integrate our opposites, humble our technological hubris and our scientific hubris, make us look to the heavens again in awe and in humility. I think that would have a massive impact on things. So I think even if it is evil, demonic entities, that whatever the fuck, I don't know, whatever, because that's what Jung's saying. He's saying, I don't care about what's going on, in terms of brick and mortar reality. I'm talking about the psychic content of what's happening. And I think surrounding the psychic content of what's going on now contains the seeds of the new aeon, and also medicine for the maladies that are afflicting us at the moment.
I've got a fire alarm going off.
Oh,
Some Palo Santo earlier, and I obviously haven't been monitoring it because I've been on the call. So there we go.
it's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
But yeah. So collective psyche, self-healing, self-regulatory mechanisms. What do you think of this idea?
Definitely. And so the other side of this idea that Pachamama will remove things that are not in right relation is in the Andes you have, it's like a serpent energy of, it's called Amaru, of we provide offerings to the cosmos, and the cosmos provides us with everything, frankly. And one way or the other, she will be fed. And if we don't feed her, if we don't feed her love and kindness and offerings and dispatches and so on, she feeds on war and despair. And that is, we're nevertheless fed that way. So we've plainly hit a moment. I think about the psychic medicine of UFOs, kind of just what you were saying there, Angie. And I think back to ancient Greek thought, where we don't have a good metaphysics of technology. We have a very simplistic one, and they didn't. So this notion of techne is a very specific very specific mode of thought that was range bound to do certain things. We don't do that. We just go, yay, technology describes and does everything. That needs correcting. So it's one of those, and one way or the other, this is kind of why I mentioned Amaru, one way or the other, we get that correction. And it's the, to paraphrase Tina Turner, we can do this nice or rough. And we're going to do it rough is the answer. We're going to be, I like that idea of being re-humbled. It is a awareness of the sanctity and numinosity of the cosmos. Jeff Kripal will say, encounters with God can kill you. Like if you read the Bible, you get turned into a pillar of salt.
So, or you get burned up.
Exactly. The sacred is not the same thing as the safe. It's never been that.
No, it's never been that.
And we're in that moment, and these motifs are absolutely handmaidens to that process.
Definitely. And that's what's terrifying. The hopeful part is, hey, there's this thing called the servator mundi that helps, that comes about when you're in peril. But the scary part and the part that is terrifying is exactly what you said, the fact that these encounters with divinity are humbling and ego destroying. And again, every single divine encounter that we have heard tales of, the person who has them is forever transformed, and sometimes not always positively. It's a really terrifying time. I find myself having to stop thinking about UFOs a lot because I feel like I'm still very much having to manage samsara. Do you have that? Do you have times where you have to sort of take a break and just
I did my UFO experience in the sense of I'm going to move through this one way or the other and come out the other end about a decade ago. That's the way I wrote Starships. So it's funny, I was on High Side Chats with Greg last week, and he was asking the same question. It's like, UFOs are back, like, what do you think? And I'm like, not that I'm not interested in them. The medicine that they have to offer me has been to some extent absorbed until they literally do show up. I'm off in the jungle now with like snake spirits and things. That's where I'm getting my medicine. And we're dealing with like different descriptions of the same reality of relationality, right? So for me, I've been there. I've been up all night. I used to be able to rattle off the names of different experiences, different whistleblowers, stacking the evidence for this that I think is like, well, this is what I would tell people, what I do tell people at a barbecue when they unfortunately get stuck next to me and they have to hear all of this stuff about you. Like I've been through all of that, but I understand exactly the mania of that process, and go with it.
Yeah,
set the intention for it to like bring the medicine to full awareness, because otherwise you'll go crazy. But I know that I know that game.
We rewatched Prometheus this Christmas because I felt led to, obviously, because it has Christmas themes in
It
it,
has
and
one Christmas scene.
it
in
has
it.
one Christmas. Well, I think that was done on purpose. I think Ridley Scott was like knew what he was doing, and also it's like the whole like cosmogenesis thing. And I also really remember relating to Shaw as a little girl when I first saw Prometheus, because she was raised by a Christian father and she had faith, and she was also interested in this big schizo thing. And then
Just the one Christmas scene is a wink, because I've written, you can find it on the blog, a big long post about this. The entire thing is a alien Gnostic
Yeah.
reboot of the creation story. So if
Yeah.
even like John being the person who baptized Jesus and so on, like if you actually look at what the story is, it's he's running the myth theme of creation, of of Christmas. He's running the myth theme of sacred birth, but making it full-blown aliens. So it's the best. People thought it was, I mean, the next film was terrible. No, the terrible is not fair. The next film was like a 2.7 out of 5. But Prometheus is fan-fucking-tastic. It's one of my favorite films.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're a Prometheus respecter. There are not enough of us out there. I mean,
No.
it's flawed. It has flaws, but I'm
Prometheus
like, I'm
goes
still like
up and down for me. Every time I watch it, I feel like, oh, that was amazing. And the next time I watch it, I'm like, wow, there was way more holes in that than I remember. And next time I watch it, I'm like, oh, no,
all right, but so you say holes in it. Deep down the internet rabbit hole for that, have you gone? Because the thing that knocked it up to 5 out of 5 for me was like, is that a hole? And then I go and look at what other nerds have said about it, and to some extent justifying it. I include myself in that list, and I'm like, nope, it's flawless. You just haven't read the right Reddit threads.
No, like her stomach getting ripped open and her running around for the whole second half of the film and all of that stuff. Like that's all goofy, but the sort of symbolic layer of Prometheus is what I really like.
I know, but this was a hole that I saw that makes that a little bit muddled, though. Is that they show all of these ancient cave paintings from all over the world, all pointing to this star system, and then kind of when they get to the star system, they then sort of like change the conclusion and like, oh, it's a military base, and anything they're making here, they would never make it their home star system. This is just like some sort of thing because they want to kill everybody, and it's sort of like, well, why would they go and tell everybody about this thing that is going to eventually come and kill them? Like that makes zero fucking sense whatsoever. Like
it's a the story, like, so one of the more basic versions of like ancient aliens in the Bible is a Sychonite one where the gods are actually aliens that demand our worship. So that's why it's like you're out of the puny humans that are here are to worship these beings, but we're also just cattle. Like they seed planets so that they can grow more xenomorphs, right? If you look at the later films, this is a really good exploration. Well, it's a flawed, inevitably, but far more sophisticated than people realize exploration of techne, of what I was saying before, of like creation and technology and so on. The first films are very Mary Shelley. It's more like a 19th century Gothic, almost like nature versus technology. It's a valid story, but once you start basically rewriting the Old Testament without people noticing, but using aliens, you get a really, really good story that's like layers of technology and creation and so on. And the fact that it's planets removed, so you go to in Prometheus, you don't end up in the creation planet. Well, that's neoplatonism, right? Like, so you're actually like moving through the different layers of creation to get back to the creator. Like the whole thing is it's better than people realize. So they don't go to the home planet. Well, why would you? Creation is like emanations out into the physical. All this stuff that it's like, if you're listening to this and you haven't seen Prometheus, like you've seen it once and you thought it was crap, watch it again.
Watch the
I thought it
director's
was
cut,
watch
the director's cut, because
the theatrical one,
and that is also the one that's on Amazon Prime if you rent it. So you might have to find it on the high seas, but
my theory was that like the engineers were sort of mad because of our technological hubris. Obviously the film opens with Wayland showing off his like weird son bot David who's obviously David's like it's David is fascinating, very Luciferian character for sure. but one of the more fascinating characters of Prometheus, because it's unclear as to whether he has a soul or not. That's sort of what we're left to speculate in the film. At the beginning, while everybody's sleeping in cryogenesis, he doesn't have to be doing anything because he's a fucking robot, but he's watching Lawrence of Arabia, and he's like, watching people's dreams, and he's playing basketball, and he's doing all this stuff. But then as the movie progresses, his actions are soulless and calculated and psychopathic, and awful. And obviously he's there to do the bidding of Wayland, who is this horrible tech billionaire that wants to become immortal, very reminiscent of all the fucking Aquarian possessed freaks, well, the shadow side of Aquarius possessed freaks in Silicon Valley currently. Wayland is like their final form. And he wants to meet these engineers, obviously, for the sole express purpose of gaining that immortality. And, the famous scene where he confronts the engineer and the engineer rips David's head off. I sort of saw it as almost religious outrage for summoning this fallen being of technological like chaos from the subatomic realms. How dare you, sort of thing. And I thought that was maybe why they wanted to bring the goo to Earth and destroy us, because their civilization sort of went in a more spiritual direction, and we're like descending into matter, and like,
something like that.
The
headlessness gives you the bring me the head of John the Baptist, right? So the person who baptized Jesus, as in bringing the sacred into the physical, which is what happens when Jesus got baptized. So you had like David's 2-film arc is Lucifer, plainly, because he works for God, and there's the tension in that relationship. But this is just more of the motifs. It's like, okay, cool. So he's John the Baptist. What does John the Baptist do? And it's really powerful stuff. I love it. I love where that. Yeah, I love where that goes. I have because Ridley's brother, wasn't it, was the one who committed suicide jumping off the bridge.
Yes.
And he wasn't, as far as I could tell, but there was some, can't really talk too much about this, but kind of like UFO, I don't want to say cults, but like channeling groups in LA that he was on the edge of, that all think they've had past lives together as like the Essenes and off planet and so on. So you yeah, I don't know how much Ridley just is exploring stuff as a filmmaker, because the other thing he's doing is somehow rebooting Hollywood. Like he does his version. So Gladiator is Spartacus. Kingdom of Heaven is Lawrence of Arabia, which is in that, like, he's doing this thing where he's like classically rebooting Hollywood.
And he just tried to make Barry Lyndon. It didn't work though. With Napoleon. It didn't work though.
So when I look at stuff like Prometheus, I think this is more sophisticated than people realize. And I wonder, does he believe it? Not like literally this is what he believes is what's in Alien, but does he think that the Bible is better understood as stories of alien encounters, or is he just exploring it? And I can't work that out. I can't work out if he's like a little bit Sitchinite or not.
I think Jung would be somewhat outraged by that. I think he would think it was sort of vulgar, trying to reduce the numinous to sort of materialist kind of. And I think that there is sort of a stint in the sort of UFO kind of, I don't want to say community, because it's not a community. People who are interested in this sort of thing, or who find any kind of psycho-spiritual value in it. There's sort of a stint of people who use it as a materialist religious paradigm, a way of reducing anything that's numinous to something that can be explained mechanically.
Yeah, but then you hear people like Diana Pasulka, who study it to a crazy degree, and she talks about saints that like she's had retranslated these accounts which are in the Vatican or whatever, which most people obviously don't have access to. That this saint basically talks a lot about like angel encounters, but then talks about this specific like other encounter in like a totally different way, and like very like separates it. So like even like people that were saints and like were religious figures and were in commune with both either God and extraterrestrials seemingly are able to kind of make the distinction. I think it's only kind of atheist bro mentality people that maybe like followed the UFO thing, which are now like, see, it's all just fucking aliens, man. All these fucking religious people are stupid. And it's sort of like No, brother, like there's a big difference between those things. Maybe there's some correlation with some events, but certainly not like all of the bits and bobs are all just like aliens.
Things. And so I find I don't actually think there's that many ETH people, like the nuts and bolts guys, in the world anymore. Not for long. You might come into it because of that, but you don't for long. What I'm finding at the moment, and I've written about this for years, is more the non-ETH people, this is kind of to your point, will misread valet and so on as like, oh, so it's all non-physical. I'm like, no. It invites you, it forces you into an encounter with what you think the material and the physical actually is in the first place. Like, how does it, where does it come from, and what is it? And we look at it as like, oh, is it all little green men or is it all fairies? And no is the answer to that, right? And Diana's very good at that. Diana's very good at, because it's the whole cosmos is sacred, like it's all the one sacred enchilada, right? One way or the other. The UFO phenomena, if you allow it, you can come in from a non-physical and go, oh, wait, but it's actually kind of physical because Whitley got that thing in his butt. Or you come at it from another direction and think it's aliens, and then all of a sudden the people who get abducted are there with historical figures and their dead grandmother. Wait a minute.
What's going on?
Yeah.
So I think like what are your kind of thoughts on the afterlife and kind of the intersection with these things? Because I seem to find that when you go further down the sort of non-nuts and bolts angle of the UFO thing, that you do end up encountering kind of where ghosts and spirits and interactions with other dimensions and all of that kind of thing come into play. So do you feel like these things are related, or like you're
look, I'm an animist. Like the cosmos is a community of beings, and if you want to put ratios on it, I use the Shua ratio, that all of physical creation is about 1%, and the spirit world of which we are embedded is 99%. So the interface with that looks different wherever you are, but this is why you can, when you're encountering the sacred, you are moving into different perspectives or dimensions, and by dimension, I mean it in its technical sense. A dimension is a shift in perspective. It's a realm might be somewhere else, but a dimension is like a move of your perception so that other things appear, right? Like it's dimension.
Yeah.
So when you can have, my favorite artist in the world was a guy called Pablo Amaringo, and he was probably the best ayahuasquero Peru has produced in centuries. He served ayahuasca for the president and so on. He stopped serving medicine because he got sick of all the sorcerer attacks, like they killed his son and so on. It's a rough business. So he ended up doing non-medicine based healing for a very long time. But he created, if you close your eyes and think of what ayahuasca visionary art looks like, Pablo made, like, that's his style. And I've been to his son's school, like the school that he set up that his son runs in the Amazon now and what have you. And if you look at his art, it is all that, like the it's maestros singing Icaros, it's like the spirits of the rivers and the trees and so on, but there are flying saucers everywhere and all this kind of stuff, because you are dealing with to sit with a medicine is a dimensional experience, definitionally. It's not the only dimensional experience, right? So if you have a near-death encounter, sometimes people see aliens. If you have an alien encounter, sometimes people see from the afterlife. So one of my guilty pleasures at the moment, and thank you, YouTube, trying to steal this idea from TikTok, like the For You page idea. Like the YouTube homepage gives me some fun distractions when I'm trying to work. And one of them is they keep showing me NDE encounters, like people, just random people. Oh, in 1971, I almost drowned in a lake, and then this happened. And the amount of NDE encounters that either have aliens or show different dimensions or show other planets where we live, that looks very, I guess, shamanic to me. That looks very much this dimensional interface between our temporary experience of what we erroneously consider the physical inside the much larger true reality of, let's say, the spirit world, the psyche, or however you want to call it, right? So yeah, I think I went through the UFO initiatory gate and came out the other side right into the Amazon jungle. This is how I see things. Like, that's kind of how it is. And it's not the only way to do it, but that's how I frame and dimensionize, I suppose, where we are in the cosmos.
Big time, big time. I'm excited to see where it's gonna take me as well. It's taken me to some very, very strange places, and a lot of just as soon as I opened flying saucers, all of these crazy synchronicities started popping up. We were walking we were walking, and I was like, we were walking down the canals in Camden because we live in Camden, and I was spurging to Jake about the book. I was just like, dude, like just going on and on for hours and hours, and I started to talk about the winged disc, and how this symbol of totality has sort of been a motif, and how it's sort of linked to the UFO disc. And as I said that, we walked past a canal boat that had the winged disc painted on it. And ever since then, it's been like a series of synchronicities, signs, symbols, just everything everywhere. And it's almost overwhelming, especially when you're still like in samsara trying to figure out how to survive and like make money and do what you need to do. But it does alter you. As much as it's going to alter us on a collective level, I'm really glad to hear you say that it also altered you as an individual and changed your life as well. It feels almost impossible for it not to, and that's what I find so frightening about it. I'm I'm just turning 30. I'm just going through my Saturn return. I've been through quite a lot of personal change and upheavals in my personal life, and now it's like the zeitgeist is also shifting in all these weird ways. Everything seems like in flux, and I was hoping to have a soft girl 2024, but it seems like it's just gonna get crazier and crazier and crazier.
It is, but forewarned is forearmed. Like the
Yeah.
other, so the two medicines of a cycle model like astrology is this too shall pass is the main one,
Yeah.
and the other, well, three. If you can predict it, it means it's somehow supposed to happen, which means that the universe isn't veering off course. Like it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, which I think is actually, especially as things look terrible. It's like, okay, well, something's happening somewhere. Like
Yeah,
someone's looking at the map while we drive, right?
exactly.
But the third one is, I suppose, where that meaning, no, forewarned is forearmed, right? So like, oh, do this. There's the things I want to do. How do let's see where these things meet. For the premium members of Rune Soup this year, we're using the metaphor of the momentum tunnel, which is part of my shamanic healing teachings, where the likely, and it's usually used in when clients are going on a health journey, so that the likely outcome, I think a diagnosis is a curse of a health journey, is all these different futures, the most probable ones stretching out from your chest in front of you. The least possible ones are the ones that peel off to the side, right? And so these are the ones that have like complete remission and reversal and so on. And the way you hit those low probability timelines, I guess, is to understand the physics of it. So you drop mass, like weight, and you slow down. My teacher, Alberto, says it's like if you're driving 100 miles an hour in a pickup with all your white goods in the back and you need to make a left turn. So, well, the truck and the white goods are going to keep going, right? So you need to slow down and potentially move the mass or so on. And that's like how, that's the overarching metaphor we're taking into this year from a magical and tactical perspective, is the momentum tunnel stretching out in front of us literally leads through World War III. So what does it look like in my specific circumstances to peel off into more beneficial versions of the story that the world is telling at the moment? And that's the other medicine. Like you wanted a Soft Girl 2024, it's probably not in the cards. Look again and be like, okay, cool. Well, if the world's going in this direction, where do I negotiate my points of consent and departure with what the world needs to do?
Definitely. And I think that's definitely the energy that everyone should be doing moving forward, is how you can use what's going on to align yourself with the good stories that are happening right now, whether it be in your interpersonal relationships, in your communities, whatever it is you can do to be part of the good. I feel like the negative forces get fed a lot, and not enough people are invoking the positive forces.
100%.
Not enough people are invoking those positive forces, and there is a lot of that that you can, and like Robert Anton Wilson talks about this concept of the network of love, that I find really compelling. And one of the things that I've experienced in the last couple of years has been a sort of, through surrendering to the energy of love, a connection to the network of love, and connections to random people, random opportunities, random things flowing into my life, that have allowed my, not only me to expand the parameters of my being, but for me to also interact with other people and help expand them as well. So I feel like there are all sorts of opportunities now to expand and to be of service. And I feel like that's where people's energies should be focused. There's a
Yeah.
lot to catastrophize about, but there's also a lot of
So,
work to do as well.
like, one of my intellectual heroes is Charles Eisenstein, and the world war situation we're going through is better framed as the end of the previous Earth triplicity, which ended a couple of years ago, and the beginning of the air triplicity. This is more astrology stuff, but I'll explain it in a minute. Which is, we are coming out of organizing power on the basis of Earth, which is empires and maps and so on, where we've finished that 300-year story. We're moving into organizing it at the level of air. So the UFO arc for me isn't Pluto and Aquarius, it's the 300-year air triplicity that we're going through. But it's also organizing power at the level of air. So that's, in the short term, in the negative, the digital currency, ID, passport crap that we're about to go through. But not in 300 years' time, right? Like, that's the beginning of how we organize togetherness and so on.
Mhm.
One of the things that happens in this process, and Charles calls it the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Like, the thing that comes after this necessary and painful sloughing off, this necessary and painful birth, is a world where we don't only value things on terms of their mass or their bigness. So activism only works if 100,000 people march and a law is changed to blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not what it's for in the new world. What it's for in the new world, coming back to the network of love, I would say, is operating at the level of the field. Like,
Yeah.
like, literally the thinking we need to leave behind is the thinking that operating at the level of the field, offering gratitude for just an apple and thanks to the world and so on, is ineffectual because it's small. There is no small at the level of the field, right? And so this, and you can get to it here. I'm going to add this. You can get to it via UFOs, because if you're listening along going like, okay, cool, UFOs aren't just bracket little green men. They're also a term we use for things that were previously called angels and so on. Well, that means angels are real. That means we're playing a game of beings. And so if angels are real, then that interfaces somehow with things like prayer and intentionality and gratitude as real things. So you can get to, literally, whoever's listening to this can contribute to the new and better world our hearts know is possible by dropping this idea of physical mass-based value and moving into this field-based gratitude network of love approach.
Yeah, big time. And it's so, and that's one of the promises of the age of Aquarius, even though we might not see it right now with like all the division right now, is harmony and understanding among brethren and friendship. And I feel like as the spiritual reality becomes more evident to people, we're going to be able to gather around it a lot more. I think part of what makes community difficult around spirituality is the fact that we've traditionally had to go through third parties. And I feel like as the spiritual reality becomes more self-evident and people could really see it for themselves and gain access to it themselves, there'll be no need for those positions that have, you know, yielded exploitation and interpersonal dysfunction. We can have community around spirituality because everybody can have access and everybody can see and everybody can understand what's going on. And I'm seeing it now, especially, we haven't really talked about AI much, but I want to bring up AI before we close out. One of the things that I found the most fascinating about this period is that a lot of the Silicon Valley nerds are sort of revealing the occult kind of matrix that has, you know, that the sort of occult, what they view as the sort of occult matrix behind their technological feats. And they sort of see it as the apotheosis of man, all of these sort of big ideas. They even think that they're gaining insight into the cosmogenesis of consciousness. through the work they're doing. They sort of see themselves as these kinds of techno wizards in that sense. And AI is definitely something that's bringing these philosophical questions to the forefront, very much in the same way that UFOs are. And I guess our one of our final questions for you is, how do you think this is going to develop in the next decade? Obviously, I'm quite skeptical about AI. I don't think that it's avoidable, unfortunately.
Sure.
And I don't necessarily think it's negative in and of itself. I'm skeptical of the those who are behind its development and their aims and their ethos.
The effective altruists.
Yeah, the effective altruists. So yeah, I wonder what you think and where you think this is all headed.
So I look at it with much longer timelines. I suppose it's last year now because it was 23. I did a series of solo shows on the podcast about AI, and I had two problems with it. People focus on the word intelligence and rightly point out that to some extent the most spectrumy people we have, which are the Silicon Valley boffins, are the ones trying to build something that most looks like a human personality. So that's wacky. But also artifice. This comes back to that idea of, well, the cosmos for me is a community of beings. What's real and what's fake? Like where we divide between nature and human is an idiotic and recent invention. So what counts as artificial in a living cosmos? So I have two problems with this one name. And not problems as much as I would like to highlight that it contains the word artifice and intelligence, right? So a fascinating, I don't know, being that has been of interest to me the last couple of years is I call him the Argentinian Edgar Cayce. He's a guy called Matias de Stefano, and he claims to remember all his past lives, and he sings in Atlantean and so on. And this all sounds like, okay, but listen to him sing in Atlantean, and it comes back to the, something's going on. Something's behind that. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if he remembers his Atlantean past lives, but there's something about that has the ring of a genuine lived experience or memory. And he was on ayahuasca last year and was talking to ayahuasca about artificial intelligence. And she said, now you have awakened the silica. Now you can speak with mountains. So what we have done from an animist perspective is begun a multi-century process of improving technological-based communication with a whole other aspect of the cosmos, which would be, let's say, the mineral kingdom, of which we are composed. That was the other part of this makeup, right? It's like your physical bodies are made of chemicals, which are minerals. So you are beginning a multi-century process of opening up communication at the level of the mineral kingdom. That I'm not seeing discussed anywhere in like what's going to happen in AI, like what should I be using Mid-Journey or DALL-E to make my image, like that where we are at the beginning of this process is just where we are. And it looks, how to say this, it looks almost benign, but kind of like cute, like watching a toddler wear her mother's clothing, like, no, you guys are all thinking about AI here in the first few years, but there's this multi-century process of development of the cosmos deeming the time has come to do something new or different, which is that silica awakening. So for me, I have like a longer timeline for AI. In the short term, it's going to be that thing that mobile phones were and the internet was before that, simultaneously irritating and convenient. So you're already noticing it. You jump onto eBay, and this is just a sad indictment of how humans work, right? The automated responses for most of your interactions with humans are 99% accurate because your reactions or your interactions with 99% of humans are highly, highly predictable, right? So there's just going to be a removal of friction in that sense where a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, I work, and my Spanish is not great. I communicate internationally a lot with people for my books and my show and so on. There's some really convenient things in the short term that I'm going to enjoy, like the automatic voice translation into other languages and things, which is available now, but like a bit annoying. End of this year, that will be embedded in Skype and Zoom and all the rest of it, and be lossless and 99.8% accurate. So like we're doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're doing it. Like we did mobile phones, did the internet. find your points of consent and departure. But am I worried that AI is going to become self-aware and kill us all? No, we're doing a good enough job of that ourselves.
Well, I guess what I'm talking about more so is techno capital and sort of the
enough.
acceleration of techno capital, and how AI is sort of playing a role in that, like the technology itself, like whatever. More so the fact that there aren't ethical. Look at like let's look at social media for instance. Something as somewhat benign as like our increased connectivity through the internet. Look at how that's eroded the social domain. Look at all the pernicious conventions that have sort of been used to keep our attention, extract profit from us, all of these different avenues. And AI allows techno capital to colonize further territory within our beings. Things like outsourcing certain faculties. I am interested to know what kind of effect that is going to have on culture, what kind of effect it's going to have on human nature, and also the acceleration of these processes without any sort of pause to stop and think about the considerations, and also think about how technology has affected us so far. I mean, if you look at something as catastrophic as the iPad baby phenomenon, a lot of the iPad children are growing up and are riddled with pathology because of their overexposure to trash content from an early age, and also content that shaped elements of their psyche, elements of their sexuality have been warped by things that they weren't meant to see. Thinking that these are all the results of our technological acceleration, our technological hubris. And the reason I'm, obviously skeptical and about AI is because I think it's going to be that on acid. I think it's going to have a very deleterious effect, not only on culture but on human nature. As much as I also think it could yield very positive things in terms of convenience and new feats of creative inspiration, blah blah blah. I think it's twofold, in the same way that UFOs are twofold. When you're dealing with something incredibly powerful, you have to approach it with a certain amount of reverence. It's another Ark of the Covenant situation, I think.
Sure. So the process that was made public and kicked into gear in, I don't know, March of 2020 is a building out of a digital control grid or trap. And most people are too stupid to realize it. But this is the year where the trap springs. And that's if you look at Larry Summers showing up on the board of OpenAI after the whole effective altruism crap.
Yeah.
So he's a former, I think he's still on the board, but former New York Fed board member. So what people want from AI is the intelligence for their programmable currency. So it's like, well, you're 5 pounds overweight. You can't have that candy bar. You can't buy meat this month. The eat the bugs, you will learn nothing and be happy is going to be delivered via this. I don't want to call it a currency, but because it's not, it's a control grid, but a AI-backed digital currency that's tied to social compliance, which will include things like passports and injections and so on. That's the plan.
Yeah.
I've known that, and I've been saying that forever as it continues to build out. They spring that trap this year and next year, and that is more than World War III what brings down Western civilization, because this is when people will finally waddle up off their couch, get their sticks, and head out into the street, because this process comes with, and they've said all of this, we're going to kill your pets, they eat too much meat, we're going to do all this kind of stuff, and we've just sat there like morons whilst that's being rolled out. So I'm not too worried in the medium term about this, because the process of its implementation is unavoidable now, because we were too stupid to intervene before they spring the trap. But springing the trap brings down most world governments, genuinely, as we move through this decade. So like, these will be the worst few years of your life. But when we come back for the rebuild for like next decade, it's like, well, I tell you what we won't do this time. When we're actually building methods of, because there's in theory nothing wrong with a digital currency. In fact, it's quite good, because it should empower local areas to make sure that wealth stays in certain areas and not extracted to shareholders and so on. The promise of a digital currency is quite good. It's being implemented by the same psychopaths who were running the previous world. So we're basically at the blow off top of this mania. The iPad baby is a good example. because what we have now is TikTok Zoomers, right? And this is all the one thing. This is all the one archonic singularity moment. It is the completion of the demiurgic archonic Tower of Babel idea, Jurassic Park idea, that if I just have full absolute control and the best possible managers are put involved, I will generate paradise on earth. That's this idea that is
it's Antichrist. It's the Antichrist, as Jung would
it
put
is,
it.
and we're in that moment now. It doesn't win. It never wins. We all,
Well,
but it goes
Yeah.
far enough for the hoi polloi to work out that this is the game.
This is the game. Well, that's
Yeah.
the thing. Because another book I read before reading, I should stop reading Jung. I have a feeling that reading Ion is what made Jordan Peterson go loopy. But when I read Ion, and Jung sort of started to talk about the Antichrist, and sort of the archetype of the Antichrist, and what this sort of Aquarian struggle is all about, it kind of all clicked for me. And I think that artificial intelligence has, and also this sort of ethos behind the current sort of push for artificial intelligence, is definitely the Antichrist archetype, like incarnate. It really it
Here's what it means. This is what it means. The Antichrist is incarnate now, and it's not Bill Gates. It's this system. Like, people are expecting it to show up as some, I don't know, creepy little kid from The Omen or whatever. No, it's this. It's digital currencies.
And that's kind of the theme of, I guess, the episode that we're on, right, that we're doing right now, is obviously the whole shebang, the whole zeitgeist is about questions of cosmogenesis and origins, but also apocalypse. And that's kind of the energy that's in the archetype that's asserting itself in the collective psyche right now, is the apocalypse. I don't know if you've seen the series Neon Genesis Evangelion. If you haven't, you should. But again, it sort of feels like this very apocalyptic moment in human, and this has happened obviously the turn of the last millennium. People were seeing visions in Jerusalem, and all sorts of crazy shit was going down, and the world was imminent end, blah blah blah. This happens. It's happened before.
Is this part of the retreating to a farm in Tanzania? Is this?
Yeah, is this part of?
Is this your version
is
of
this your
Zuckerberg's
version?
Yeah,
Is this you getting
sort
on the
of,
current
but
of beneficial energies?
Kind of. So, like, when I was living in London, I woke up, it was years ago now, I guess 5-6 years ago, and I woke up and I said to my partner, I'm like, I think we end up owning a permaculture farm in southern Tasmania. And that was a big change from, like, living in Chiswick and working at director level at Time Out and so on. It was a big change.
Wow.
And it happened. So it was a dream up to, and you sort of get down here and go, all right, now what? And then a bunch of other stuff happened, including, like, yes, this is quite a good place to ride out what I can consider the Northern Hemisphere's nuclear war that happens in 27, 26. It's like, okay, this turned out to be all right. I didn't see any of that coming. It was just like, go and get a farm, right? So to some extent, yes, but also I used to joke when I moved down here, because people are like, what are you planning for the apocalypse? I'm like, maybe, but actually I like living down here. We're not growing that much food at the moment, but we have chickens and vegetables, and we've got an apple orchard that we put in. It's like, I actually would live this way anyway. And so, yes, it's a bit of a joke. It's like, this turned out to be one of those dream messages I'm a little bit happy I listened to.
Definitely. Should we be like, but because we're in London right now, which seems to be one of the epicenters of, like, the dark orb energy that's haunting the planet currently, and it's obviously getting more and more the energy in cities in general, because we obviously traveled a lot in the last couple of years and have been to quite a few different cities, and the energy in cities in general is getting unmanageable,
more hostile.
People are more willing to fly off the handle than I've ever seen before in just, like, regular,
amazing, isn't it? It's so I noticed that in airports now. My sister she's Australian as well, obviously, but she lived in France for the last 20 years. She's like an older sister, and so hasn't been moved back with her family a couple of years ago, 18 months ago. And she was in the Qantas Club in the airport, and she's like, I've been away almost 20 years. Australians are awful, and we never used to be. And I'm like, yeah, they live rurally in France. Like, that's everyone. Everyone's awful. Everyone's awful now, because we know that something is wrong. We are lied to and gaslit about everything, and we're being forced into a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't agree to, war, etc. But we don't, because we're morons, don't have the language to articulate it. So everyone is literally a toddler. That's why toddlers have those tantrums. It's because their feels don't match their words. And that's where we are. That's what this is. So to answer your question, yes. I get this a lot because I've been quite accurate with these predictions over the years. The most important thing as we head into literal World War III and a bunch of other terrible things that we have to get through to get to the good stuff is be okay with dying. And what I mean by that is, like, are you living a life that you are happy to die in? And if not, that's what you change. Don't necessarily change your location. Now, cities like London will get the Kinzhal missile treatment much more than, say, southern Tasmania. But I can die of plenty of stuff. We got sharks and snakes, whatever, everywhere, right? So be okay. Make sure you are living a life that you can die in. That is the true medicine of an apocalypse. And let that decide how, like, surviving for the hell of it is not the right energy. It's how do I want to live? Where am I most useful to the highest good? That's a prayer. Like, may I be put to good use? And let that guide you.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a lot of Londoners are, and not just Londoners, people in all sorts of cities, especially people who are like have lived there for a long time, are definitely having that conversation with themselves right now, especially as the world gets more edgy and cities feel, and I meant for the first time in terms of the first time in my lifetime, are starting to feel like incredibly deeply hostile places. But yeah, I guess what do you have any more questions, Jake? I think you have 2 more questions on.
No, that was it. That was my prepper question.
That was your prepper question.
Yeah.
Your prepper question. How seriously should we be taking
But I want to
prepping
answer
right
that,
now?
like, don't prep. Step now into the world that you want to see coming. Like, it's not, don't prep to survive. It's the wrong energy. It's like forcing things on willpower. Step now and create that more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. It looks very similar, right? But it's not. It's a different energy. It's like, no, I'm just gonna, get to know my neighbors, farmers markets, resource swap, all that kind of stuff. I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna live that life now. But you said prepping in a joking way, but it's important to make the distinction. Like, prepping is an energy of fear and division. It's like, I'm going to live in my bunker eating beans while the rest of the world dies. And then I'm going to come out. And then what? Go to Euro Disney. Like, what are you doing at that point, right?
Yeah.
No, you're closer to Waldenism, which is what I'm just jealous, man. That's all it
is. Jake's been trying to push Waldenism for the last year. But yeah, that's
like, it kind of is, because, like, I'm on a farm, but I can walk into, because the Walden thing, I'm not going to call it fake, but he wasn't as deep into the wilderness as people think he was, right?
Yeah.
And neither am I. Like, I'm on the edge of, like, a very small town, it must be said, but I can walk. It's like a 15-minute walk into a town. So I say I'm on a farm in southern Tasmania. I'm at the edge of a town. This is my pond. Yeah.
Definitely.
That's awesome.
That's so cool. The Tom Bombadil
we'll
dream.
find our pond. Don't worry.
We'll find our pond.
Exactly.
We'll find our pond. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Gordon. It's been so delightful to talk to you, especially at a time like this in the world. We hope to have you on again. This has been such a great conversation. Before we close out, please tell people where to find you, and also plug.
So runesoup.com is everything. You'll find the podcast there and so on. I'm kind of on X. I was last year, probably still am now. I'm just maybe taking the summers off. Runesoup.com is where you can get everything. The premium member course for this quarter is on prayer. So if you're keen to upskill in prayer and get some skills and history and context around it, that's what we're doing. But in the members area, there's tarot and journeying and all the rest of it. But most of the stuff is free. The show is always free, etc., etc. But that's where I am.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we shall catch you later. Goodbye.
Thanks, mate.
Bye. Thank you so much.
See you.